Hello, what magic is this, listener? It is I, Douglas, and welcome back to the month of Divination here on your favorite podcast about magic, the occult, the esoteric, the paranormal, the supernatural, and the weird. What magic is this? So we have cleared up the history of the tarot as well as busted some tarot myths. Let us move on in this month of divination to an actual form of divination, one which many of you might not have ever heard of before, but for my money, certainly needs to be known. Today, we will be tackling geomancy, and there is really only one person that I had to talk to about this somewhat austere and still to this day esoteric practice, and that is the modern cunning man and geomancer, Dr. Alexander Cummins. Dr. Al, welcome back.
Hello, it's lovely to be back, Douglas. Thank you. People
can't see us, but we're both dressed in somewhat loose clothing. It's summer. It's the middle of summer. Of course, I decided this is the time when I want to interview people and close all the doors and windows. So,
if my voice starts getting quiet and distant, I assure you, I'm just slowly melting into a puddle. That's right. What that is.
Again, a lot of people maybe haven't heard of geomancy. I'm going to tell a little bit of a personal take on geomancy. As people know, I was somewhat obsessed with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. That's where I kind of learned about geomancy. And would you agree with me, Dr. Cummins, that the Golden Dawn kind of did a dirty with geomancy? They kind of fiddled with it a little bit, and then they were like, "This is geomancy," and it's not really geomancy the way that they did it, was it?
Yeah, no, they're definitely taking part in a wider historical trend that we can get into later. That
For sure.
I think kicks off around the 18th century. So I don't think we can lay the blame squarely at the Golden Dawn's feet, but they definitely participated in that process of trying to streamline and thumbnail down and broad brushstrokes quite a complicated system. We'll talk about the complexities of it today, and attempted to try and provide lookup tables for the variety of answers that it could provide, and ended up squashing a lot of the nuance of those answers from some quite sophisticated things where this answer could mean one thing for, depending on the kind of question you're doing, or even the way you phrase the question can change the meaning of whether or not, for instance, an answer of loss or gain is a good or a bad thing for whatever you're trying to do. Are you trying to lose weight? Are you trying to get promotion? Which of these is it's contingent and dependent? And a lot of these nuanced answers got squashed down into just yes or no, good or bad, favorable or unfavorable.
Right.
And so you have multiple generations of people coming to geomancy and being like, this seems a little too simple. And then it gets simplified further and further and further.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, absolutely, this is it's no one's fault that history has denied them better access and understanding to this grounded and worldly oracle.
For sure. And for myself, I kind of played with geomancy. I've been doing this for about 20 years or so. I played with geomancy much like the United States played with the metric system in 1975. It was like, oh, let's try this for a bit. And nah, that's it. Moving on. But in the last month, geomancy has been much on my mind. And I have to say, it is such a fantastic form of divination. It might seem very simple to begin with, but hang in there. I also have to say, before we jump in proper, podcasting might be the worst way of trying to learn geomancy. We're not going to take you through a 101 course here. Right. Dr. C has his own course. Please take his course if this stuff is interesting to you. But we're going to attempt to try and go through some of this stuff. So big first question here, Dr. Al, what is geomancy?
Right. So says the person very enthusiastic, has been waiting to talk about this for a very long time. No, let me try and curb my enthusiasm just slightly. There are many things that get called geomancy. That's probably the first thing to say. Yes. I have had conversations with people who were pretty sure that it mostly referred to Paleolithic rock magic, for instance. That's a kind of stone magic, right? Rock magic. The other big things that get called geomancy are various Taoist sorceries, which are tied often to things that might be called ley lines or comparable to energy lines, energetic earth models and mysteries and things of that nature, which can take both a kind of topological form of divining by walking across landscapes, for instance, and seeing where things are placed in them, and kind of augury by landscape kind of thing. That's also a kind of geomancy. And then you get full on feng shui and
Yes.
and that kind of thing that also sometimes is translated as a geomancy. The geomancy I practice is European Renaissance geomancy. I mostly learned it from reading and practicing from early modern texts, Catan's Geomancy, very inventively named there, Hayden's Theomagia, Robert Flood, even like John Case and various other early modern practitioners that we can talk about if we want to. What it is, what happened was, we can think about it like a system of sortilege, and we can think about it as a very astrologized form of sortilege. We'll talk about how geomancy applies the use and rules of astrology without paying much attention to where the physical deep sky objects actually are. None of the sky maths. We don't bother with that. So on the one hand, it's a sortilege. It's done by fall or by lot. But crucially, you are essentially working out odds and evens. Through this sortilege, we engage in a formalized, and I would say dialectical, we'll talk about what I mean by that, a formalized mapping of potentialities and of patterns of ways in which patterns play out in the world and how they interact with each other and produce patterns in response, reactive and galvanizing and down-regulating patterns. We could also say that this kind of geomancy can be kind of keyed into, and we have some post-structuralist anthropologists of this who've tried to make lists of what counts as geomancy and what doesn't. But it seems there's an important place to say, and especially when we're talking about what does it look like if you see it in the wilds, in the field, it's the use of these 16 figures, which are we talk about them in mathsy terms. They're 4-bit binary figures. What that means is they look like a travel I Ching, but rather than hexagrams, they are tetragrams. They are 4 lines rather than 6. And they are, instead of broken or unbroken, we talk about them as each line having single or double points, or dots, or stars, or pricks, or circles, very occasionally. And through we talk about what that figure is itself a map of. It's a map of a particular kind of pattern. They're given elemental and planetary identities, and that's probably the not concise way I could say what it is and what I do with it. And we can get into how it's charted and how it's applied and where it comes from and all that kind of stuff. But that's kind of where I'd start with it. Yeah.
So let's get into something like the history, because I love the history of this kind of stuff. I just did the history of the tarot episode. Where did geomancy come from? What would be the history of geomancy? I've heard a lot of, I read a lot, and so I always enjoy the history stuff. But man, they're really just have like this is what we think. But what to you, because you've been doing this for far longer than I have, some would say it's your job. But what's the history of geomancy? Do you think?
Oh, the history is absolutely Arabic. Its origin is absolutely Arabic. We can be damn sure of that. My accent is terrible, so please don't take it. But Ramal, that's variously translated as the science of sand cutting, is the precursor to geomancy. It has the 16 figures. It has mapping them with a chart that we call a shield. And it is originally developed by, again, the notion of sortilege can be, we'll talk about the various tools we can use. You can use dice, you can flip coins. You're after 1 or 2, right? Odd or even, a binary system. But one of the other ways, one of the very traditional ways, was to pray and to make marks in the sand without counting them, and then to tally them up afterwards. And that you do that 4 times, and therefore you've got 4 sets of odd or evens, and you've just generated your first geomantic figure. And we see that practice being used in European geomancy as well. It seems to come into Europe around the 10th, 11th centuries. We have stray references to geomantic bits and pieces in like Chaucer and things like that. He makes a joke about the sun being like Fortuna Major, one of the solary figures of geomancy. So it's clear it was being used a little bit. It's a relative latecomer in more popular printed texts and in the vernacular of English and French and German in some cases as well. And it's a relative latecomer. Like a lot of the stuff isn't translated until end of the 16th century. But people are practicing it and seem to be teaching it like a folk art throughout that period. But it's absolutely from Arabic diviners and merchants and scholars, and their works being wider like distributed out into not just Europe, it also finds its way again through like various Arabic trade and war and intellectual exchange into West Africa, where it informs an awful lot of at least the how would I phrase it, informs some of the infrastructure, we could say, of West African divination like Ifa or Fa.
Yeah. That's incredible. From what I understand, it's like it was practiced by almost every strata of society that would have geomancy. It would be from kings to the lowliest merchant to even beggars. If they had some beans, they could throw them on the ground. It was practiced by anyone. But what was it used for the most part, and just how popular was it?
It seems to have been incredibly popular. By the time we get these texts like Christopher Catan's Geomancy being translated into English in 1597, I want to say, it sells out immediately and goes through several editions. Like there's already a demand for it. It's not just this hot new thing that is the latest trend. It's that people already have heard of it and seen it practiced. It seems to have a little bit of a you do see some very arch occult philosophers. I'll bang on about how Robert Flood swore by it, for instance. But you also seem to see it having a reputation amongst especially like cunning folk, the local wise women, village wizards, and local spirit workers who get referred to collectively as cunning folk. And as such, it also has a kind of reputation as like a dirt astrology. Again, you don't need access to ephemerides or like telescopes or anything like that. You were doing this by, like you say, throwing beans or flipping coins or bottle caps or Saint medals or any number of other things, as well as just like you just need a bit of paper or a stick and some dirt, right? It can form its wisdoms through doodling effectively. Like you can do ritual doodling, and there's techniques for it and things like that, one-line drawings and stuff where you count the number of times the line goes over itself, things of that nature. So it's incredibly accessible. The European Renaissance stuff absolutely overlays even more astrology, which is already present in a lot of forms of Rammel. And thus, if you are aware of what Mars, how Mars is a fighty guy, then you already are like a lot of the way there to understanding these patterns being played out. What do people go for it specifically for? It seems, so there are many examples of like astrologer physicians in the early modern period also employing geomancy, and I'm fascinated going through their case files when they do one and when the other. Yeah. One of them seems to be if you have like the kind of, there's all sorts of examples of clients who are like turning up at 8 a.m. on a Monday at their office and being like, hey, I spoke to this girl on Friday. Like, is anything going to happen? Like, should I go for it? Oh. And we see a couple records of these diviners doing a full horary chart for it, full astro chart. And then they'll come back the following day and be like, what about this other girl? And it seems that like, once they've done loads of information and they just want like, they want to like zone in on actually what you need to do right now rather than what everything in the cosmos is doing, you go to geomancy. For me, it seems a very grounded and practical form of divination that works especially well at working out what to do now about what you are trying to achieve. So giving you both a sense of how realistic it is, how much work it would be to get there if the tides of fate seem against it. Yeah, crucially also like, what do I need to do now to ensure that can happen? I would also say that there are other particularities that that the system itself has strengths in, which is in navigating and charting complexities of relationships, not just between people, but between people and events, shifting circumstances, places, and things of that nature. Again, because the figures aren't just 16 answers, they are themselves these diagrams of the interrelation of elemental forces. And so figures are literally added together. Like you turn up, you've had a really irritated day and you are full of like poor energy. You're full of that like Aries, fighty young boy marshal kind of, that's what's marking you right now. And you go into a room and someone is being super watery and up in the air. And this makes you eventually have to ponder like, what's the wisdom of this thing? That's an interaction between Pua, the martial figure, via a watery figure of the moon's dynamism and its spirits, and Albus, the figure that is produced by adding those figures together. We'll talk about what the adding means, but the essential point is that like these are dialectical and somewhat empirical. They are maps of energies that if this energy is added to this pattern, if it meets this pattern, it's always going to produce this antithesis or this synthesis. And so being able to map lots of moving parts in a situation rather than trying to cohere lots of separate information about varying degrees of cosmological context into a single answer, you're able to do an awful lot. It also has, I would argue, a better way of prioritizing what information to concentrate on. A geomantic chart will literally spit out the judgment, the answer at the end once you've set it. And then you can go through all of the, like, you know, again, the tiny moving parts of the situation and work out why that's the answer.
Right.
As opposed to, say, and again, I'm not trying to pick fights with tarot readers here, but it's a very different process to be laying cards out and then to be producing the wider or deeper vision or wisdom of the thing by kind of, I love comics, so like by sequential art, right? You're looking at like the 9 of Cups and then the 4 of Swords or what have you. Like you are building up a sense of what's going on. You see this with Lenormand as well, right? You're going to get a letter from a man about a mouse, right? Like, and you're literally building a sentence, right? Geomancy doesn't do that. You spend a bunch of time muttering and adding the figures together in various ways to produce syntheses, which then get added to produce new syntheses that end up being distilled down to this final judgment, and you can then work out why. So it's a bit front loaded in its answer, as opposed to you get the answer by exploring the cards at the end.
Yes, we'll circle back to that a little bit later on. So you say it was incredibly popular, and now basically, besides yourself and a few other people, almost nobody knows about geomancy now. So what caused it to wane in popularity? Was it just like, can we just blame the Enlightenment again, or what occurred?
I love blaming the Enlightenment.
Like,
yeah,
it's the best, isn't it?
The Enlightenment. Yeah. Patting themselves on the back, calling themselves the Enlightenment. Who do they think they are? Yeah, no. I think we can in part. I think also an implicit classism that goes with a lot of that Enlightenment, like the rule of reason, our reason, nice white men reason. I think that's literally the case. There's elements of like it's regarded as a Moorish art, and so there is definitely like racist elements of like, don't do that dirt stuff that dirt people do. There's a little element of that in there. What we mainly get, though, is that geomancy seems a victim of its own popularity. That's the nicest way I think I can frame this, that so many people want to do it, that there is a demand for texts, and so many people want to do it that there's a demand for simpler and more streamlined texts that take those complicated answers of, so we have the 16 figures. Those figures are applied into the chart, which we can think of as a 15 card spread. And the first 12 of those places are assigned to the houses of the heavens. So you're not just charting, the two martial figures, Pur and Rubius, necessarily. You're also charting where they, like Pur in the first house, Pur in the second house, or the equivalent thereof. Pur in the matter of like the young warrior, in the matter of like movable resources, in the matter of siblings, in the matter of the wife or the partner, right? So we're charting the 16 figures in 12 different houses, which means technically we're actually dealing with a deck of cards of 192 different answers, right? So quickly, a very simple system, just 16 answers, starts to develop into this very complicated thing. There's various other ways it's complicated. And so these nuanced answers where Pur in the second means, protect your bank, someone might try and rob you soon. For instance, is one thing it could signify if a bunch of other things are in place that confirm that. You get just like, oh, bad. Like it starts to streamline down and try and make itself simpler and more broad brushstrokes. And there's also an element as that happens and as it gets more popular and as, gosh, heavens forbid, women start practicing it, that an awful lot of like, again, Enlightenment academics start being like, well, this is just a parlor game. Like this can't be like proper wisdom. The poor people are doing it. Women are doing it. How dare they? This can't be any good. Let's abandon it and do something complicated instead that hopefully requires a bunch of expensive lab equipment just so we can keep the gate nice and closed.
Right. Huh. That's interesting. You say it was a victim of its own popularity. So it basically pogged out. I don't know if you guys had pogs in England. You guys have. Yeah. All right. Good.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone wants to practice it, and as more people, and again, because it kind of has a reputation of being something that dodgy people do as well, a little bit. There's plenty of like, again, highfalutin occult philosophers being like, no, this is the true science of reality. That itself, people expect geomancers to be dodgy, and when that's the case, professional standards start to decline as well, potentially. So it's a little bit like, again, anyone that denies that some people calling themselves cunning folk were in fact like full-on con artists is not paying attention to the record enough. Like magic has like anything, has a bunch of people, lying to each other in it in different ways in magical practice, I guess. Yeah, there's a bunch of factors going on, especially in terms of like who you go to when you don't necessarily want other people to know that you're gathering information as well. So we do see its use in the service magician's arsenal in like some courtly affairs and things like that. So I don't want to say it was only practiced by poor people, but that seems partly why it was popular, and its popularity breeds increasingly accessible texts, should we put it like that, which are increasingly getting rid of the complexity.
Before we get into the dirty of this kind of dirt divination, and we're actually going to give the listeners a little bit of homework, not so much homework, but just something to refer to. As you say, like, it was practiced by almost everybody of every strata. Are there any superstars of geomancy? Are there people like we can look about? I know Agrippa wrote about geomancy, or at least he's attributed to talk about geomancy.
Yeah, we're pretty sure that like the text in the fourth book of occult philosophy, which is a compilation of his like B-sides and other bits that he didn't put into other things, and a bunch of things that may not have been written by him that were attributed. Some of the stuff. Well, yeah, again, I go back and forth on particular chapters and texts, but it looks like there are two works of geomancy in the fourth book, and they look to be written by him, well, at least one of them, at least. Fourth book is pretty infamously dour. Like, things are bad. Like, on the whole, like the fourth book's interpretation of like most figures is like doom. Like it's a little, it tends towards the doomy a little bit, and like you need. I think like it's helpful to compare like 4 or 5 different handbooks of like what they say this figure means in this particular case when you're asking this particular kind of question and where it falls in the thing. But yeah, Agrippa seems into it. He says in the 3 books that it's one of the most accurate forms of divination. Yeah. So suck it. Uncle Heinrich's on my side. No,
that's right.
So there's that. Yeah, I mean, Agrippa is his own kind of a cult rock star, in and out of jail, and the Vanity of the Arts and Sciences kind of being written like, oh, I can't talk about magic. I guess I can't talk about anything then. This like grandiose kind of like
throwing every toy out of the pram.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Rage the Academy. I am a big fan of John Hayden. I mentioned him earlier. A lot of people aren't. He is regarded as a particularly, quote, idiosyncratic magician in an era where, the work of Dame Frances Yates is showing that, showed that the Rosicrucian movement may well have been literally a secret society of, invisible early modern James Bonds wandering around being magical spies and like saving the world. It may have been a grand, daft international media hoax. It's likely to be somewhere in the middle, but most people agree that the whole point of the Invisible College is that you didn't talk about it. John Hayden is one of the few people out there being like, I'm a Rosicrucian. Here's how to do the Rosicrucian method of physics. Here's how to do the Rosicrucian way of geomancy. Here's how we work with spirits. Here's how we make talismans, his term for kind of talismanic objects. I'm a big fan of Hayden. He is idiosyncratic, is putting it mildly. He is in an era where it was not uncommon to crib whole chapters from other occult texts and to say at the beginning, I consulted Agrippa, and therefore there's not really a standard citation model at that point. So it's not outright. It looks like outright plagiary, but it needs to be thought of in a slightly different way. Hayden takes that to extremes and is cribbing not just chapters but whole like books, like 4 or 5 chapters in a row of Agrippa. He's grabbing bits from all sorts of stuff. Some historians of magic argue that he was probably making it up. It's so odd. I think the more you look at it, the more consistent his stuff starts to look. But maybe that's just because I also work with. He's one of the. Summoning and working with dead magicians is a big part of my practice. I try and learn my necromancy from source, and so he's one of the ones that turns up. So he's also a weird Ponzi ghost uncle who
that's awesome.
Disapprovingly over my shoulder sometimes. So I feel like I have to talk about Uncle John, but also in terms of like academic and occult rock stars, Robert Flood absolutely is on the continent around 1608 after the publication of his after he precedes William Harvey's discovery of the circulation of the blood about the body through vivisection and anatomization and dissection. That's in like 1623. Robert Flood is already saying that the blood circulates around the body. Previously, it was thought that the blood went from the heart just straight outwards and was like absorbed by the time it got to the skin and then just like kept radiating outwards because, in battle, someone gets cut, an artery goes, like you see this sprinkler pumping, right?
Right.
And it's Harvey that says, no, it's going round the body because we've watched the veins and see the heart and squeezed it and all that kind of stuff. Ooh. And Flood has been saying that for 20 years, nearly 15 years beforehand. But his argument is that it must be like that because the heart is like the sun. And by the way, it's a heliocentric universe. Didn't you know? And so he doesn't even flee. He ends up going to Europe because he's not popular back home because that's not a popular attitude. A, because he's saying weird things about the heart that will later be proved true. And B, because he's positing a heliocentric universe, which even in 1608 was still not a super popular idea, especially with a lot of the clergy. So Flood's important for all sorts of reasons, for writing the Mosaical philosophy, for developing ideas of sympathetical magics, of whether that's like the weapon salve gets talked about a lot, or the symphonical harmony of one blood of all humans, which I think is a really beautiful notion. He's also very interested in health and the body. And again, that old model of physics is the same thing. What occurs in the microcosm also occurs in the macrocosm and vice versa. Why everyone's a doctor, whether they're a cunning person, a physician or a physicist. But he's also absolutely adamant. He's also super into geomancy, and we get all sorts of accounts of him wandering around pubs in Avignon and doing readings for people and patting himself on the back about how good he is at it and things like that. He's also very interested in the winds, and that's a big part of his demonology, as well as his stuff on health and on magic more generally. And so, yeah, Robert Flood's a great dude. In terms of contemporary, like modern living geomancers as well, I have to shout out my good friend and colleague Sam Block as well of the Digital Ambler, who's one of my dear colleagues and excellent friends. Who's been putting out material on geomancy for free on his blog on Digital Ambler for years now, which is fantastic stuff. And I recommend folks go and check that out if you want to explore more things about like someone who's a contemporary and around at the moment. You can ask him questions. He's on Twitter.
You can.
Yeah.
You can. Yes, you can.
So yeah,
if you go to the Hermetic House of Life Discord server, he's there. You can ask him anything there. Sam is he's
a good egg, yeah,
at everything he does. Absolutely. All right, folks, here we go. So a little bit of homework, or at least something to look at. Head to whatmagicisthis.com. Either go to the menu and find the episode Geomancy with Alexander Cummins. Click it, scroll down. You're going to see something weird. It looks like 16 sets of dots, 4 to a line, and some strange names beside them. All right. Those are the 16 figures. What's below that is going to be something that looks like a shield, like a knight. That's what they would have right on their arm. That's a geomantic shield. Okay, so you have that in front of you. What we're going to go through next is you need those. You need to see those. All right, so before we even talk about this, you're going to look at them. You're going to be like, oh, okay, it looks like a lot of dots and stuff like that. So obviously, I'm going to have to do some counting at some point. I know for myself, one of the reasons that I was not attracted to geomancy was because I thought that geomancy was going to be about math and addition, and I hate math. I was terrible at it. I would always cheat off of other kids' exams. Anyways, I was great at cheating. Anyways, let's go through this. This is an utter myth that you need to know a lot about math to do geomancy. Let's destroy this. So somebody comes up to you and it's like, ew, geomancy looks like math. Don't want to do it. What do you say to them?
If I'm like instantly trying to jump into like, no, like come on board, join us. One of the things that I commonly say is that you only need to be able to count up to 4 to be able to do the vast majority of geomancy. There are a couple things that might require you to count the number of dots, of single dots or double dots, which might mean you have to count up to 30, but there's no, I don't think I know any of the techniques that require any like complicated division or multiplication or anything like that. The reason I say you have to count up to 4 comes down to the fundamentals of how we map the thing I've been talking about, the interaction of the figures, how this pattern of energy, when it's marked and it meets this pattern of energy and it's marked, when you're like this and your boss is like this and you go into work, here's the result. The way we generate those is by, again, working out the odds and the evens. So to reiterate, like you can literally, and I often recommend my clients do this for the first throw of a chart so it comes from their hands, especially if I'm reading at a distance online. You can flip a coin 4 times, right? So let's say we flip that coin and we got heads, tails, tails, right? So if we take heads as a single dot and tails as a double dot, that's a figure we can say from the top to the bottom has 1 dot, then 1 dot on the second line, 2 dots on the third line, 4 dots on the fourth line. Here is again why talking about this over radio or podcast is less helpful. I'm doing all sorts of hand motions here, I assure you folks. So that's how we generate a figure, right? We're relatively clear about that, okay? We then, let's say that marks you right now. You are marked by Fortuna Minor, a figure of like easy come, easy go, the dumb luck of the sun, and occasionally the kind of coasting. So you turn up to work and you're like, oh God, I don't really want to do data entry today. I'm going to sit at my computer and pretend to work for a little bit. And your boss, for instance, may have, oh gosh, what's a pattern that plays out? Who knows? For whatever reason, let's say your boss is deeply depressed at the moment, is marked by Tristitia, the figure of sorrow, a saturnine figure associated kind of with Aquarius as well. That figure is 2, 2, 2, 1, if we're going from top to bottom again. And so if those patterns meet, you literally add the points together and work out whether they're odd or even again. So again, we're ultimately getting to just odds or evens, which is why you need to be able to count up to 4, because let's do this line by line. We've got Fortuna Minor meeting Tristitia. Fortuna Minor, its first line, its fire line, is a single dot. The first line of Tristitia, its fire line, is a double dot. And so 2 plus 1 is 3, which is odd, which means that the first line of the figure, which is product of their interaction, will have a single dot. And you do that for each of them. And again, you just need to know whether it's odd or even. And that's what gets called addition. That's the process of working out how this pattern meets its antithesis and produces a synthesis, right? In that case, what would we get? 1, 1, 2, 1. Oh, you're going to have a fight.
Yes,
that's poor right there. 1, 1, 2, 1, right? That young, fiery, like, yeah, you're going to turn up and be like, I'm only pretending to work today. Your boss is deeply depressed and decides to not deal with his own feelings, but instead have a huge argument with you about how you're not working hard enough, right? This is how this stuff plays out. And it's this grounded and practical. We can also, these all have elemental and planetary connotations to them as well, that can also inform the most arcane of like magical remediations for these kinds of, quote, mundane issues. So you need to be able to count to 4.
That's it.
Yeah, and that's it. That's basically it. There are, as I say, there are techniques for determining, again, concepts we stole from the actual astrologers. Setting the geomantic part of fortune and the index is a process of counting up the dots and then fitting them in the houses. Basically, you reduce them by 12 each time until they don't reduce anymore, and they turn up in a house. What they're for is for God, I hate quoting Donald Rumsfeld even implicitly. Therefore, working out what we don't know, we assess, we set a chart and we assess the court, the final like judgment, the answer that distills down. But we also look to the tiny moving parts of the scenario. For instance, question about question about work, right? You might talk about your employees in the 6th, people you hire, and you might talk about your boss, your lord, in the 10th. So you would look to those particular parts of what's going on as well. And you know that you're going in like being like, oh, I need to know exactly what marks my boss for the time being, how they're behaving, what patterns are going to play out around them. But we may also, in some charts, need to know things that we didn't know going in. So the classic here is, reading about like how to find a new job, spits out that you should talk to your father. And the client is like, but my dad doesn't know anything about my line of work. You're like, no, but the chart says like it would be really helpful. And they ring their dad, and their dad's like friend down the pub is hiring that exact position. Like, we didn't know we needed to ask. We didn't know we needed to look to your dad because it didn't seem relevant to the question, but it was. And geomancy can tell you things that you didn't know you needed to know. And in that case, that's why that's helpful to be able to count up to 30. Yes. But other than that, there is as much, I would argue, creative and spirit-led interpretation in working a geomantic chart and in calling spirits to help you interpret it, rather than treating it as direct, the word of God from spirits, that they sit on your shoulder and help you read it. Within those formalities of knowing, ideally what each of those 192 combinations of 16 figures in 12 houses means for particular questions as well. Within that, there's I would say, a great variety of of space to be moved by things called intuition and informed by and led by spirit, shall we say. It's not a free-for-all, but it also isn't just maths.
This is what I want people to realize. And I loved that answer. It's a great answer, but this is literally, for the most part, if you're starting out with geomancy, if you want to get going, you literally need to know 1 + 1, 1 + 2, 2 + 1, and 2 + 2. That is the only math that you will need to do. That's literally it to begin with, to getting started. And Dr. Al is entirely correct. There's this wonderful nuance within the 16 figures, and they have their own idiosyncratic language that, it just requires a little bit of memory to go through some of the stuff, but it is incredibly intuitive, which is why I think it's one of those things where, yes, the comic book version of reading a fortune through something like tarot is great. You might need something a little bit more computational. Geomancy, that's where it can step in. And that's where it can be. If you need to know, say you're doing some kind of spirit interaction, if you need to know something a bit more computational, geomancy is a good place to go for that kind of stuff. You're not going to get those answers from tarot.
Yeah, it's said to be very good at, we can be clear about that distinction. Tarot is great for exploratory matters where a yes or no isn't useful, where we need to know like qualities of things and like perspectives and possibilities. Geomancy will absolutely spit out yes or no's about things. They're dependent on exactly, if you're asking like, will this new diet work? And you get Acquisitio as a judge, gain. No, it won't. Like, that's a very definitive no. Some of them are a bit more like, maybe. Some of them are even a bit more like, it's up in the air right now. Not every time is a good time to ask something or to get an answer about something. And that's interesting as well. Yeah. Takes us into some places around the craft of divining more broadly. Yeah, but if you know your 7 planets, if you know Mars is the fighty guy, if you know the sun is the shiny guy, then you are already a lot of the way to understanding. Each of the figures is ruled by a planet. 2 of them kind of have double planetary associations with the benefics and the malefics. But on the whole, if you already know that Jupiter is about expansion and accomplishment and increase, and also about joviality and joy, you know the 2 geomantic figures are Acquisitio and Laetitia, are gain and joy. They are very much Jupiter's business up front and its party in the back, right? The mullet of Jupiter. And you can think about these like the good side of the planet and the bad side. Some of them don't really have, like Jupiter, the greater benefic, doesn't really have a bad. Joy is not always the best solution. Sometimes you need to get your hands dirty rather than being like, this is great. So it's not always the most useful, but it's not like, again, in contrast, like Saturn, the greater malefic, both of those figures, Karka, imprisonment, and Tristitia, sorrow, are like, kind of bad news bears. There are times when that isolation of incarceration of Karka is the focused spotlight, or is the protective magic circle, or is a bunch of things that can be useful. But we can think about them as goodies and baddies, but I like to think about them as the hands of the planet in the sublunary world. And here's where there's kind of this grassroots cosmology that seems present there, that we can think about them as the feet that the planet, that the wandering stars walk across the face of human time and space with. And so like how the planets actually are in the world is signaled by the figures that they inform and that they fuel and that they cohere sympathies with.
Absolutely. So again, math, not entirely necessary. What I would say, if you're starting out with trying to do geomancy, you probably want to know a bit about astrology, and you probably definitely need to know a little bit more about the elements. That would be earth, air, water, and fire. That will definitely, if you know a bit about that and a bit more about astrology, you're well on your way to getting towards a handle of even beginner level geomancy. Let's talk about something that I think is maybe my favorite aspect of geomancy. So you talked about how people can do different ways of getting these figures. People can flip a coin, they can roll dice. You want to have something that will either give you like a heads or tails, some kind of like a binary. But what are some of the more interesting, or what are your favorite ways of doing? I know maybe you mentioned that dice or some of your favorite way of doing this.
Yeah, I like using dice sometimes. Yeah,
there's these things called Druid sticks. I don't know if that's I'm going to say, I don't know if that's historically accurate. If Druids did use these sticks, is that what do you have to say about that kind of stuff?
It seems unlikely. Yeah, I don't know why they're called Druid sticks. I do use sticks a fair bunch, and then I've used like popsicle sticks that I've marked with 1 and 2 on the other side. There are a bunch of woodworkers that make really nice sticks. I use some with like sympathetic woods for the patrons of the spirits and powers that I work with that help me be as good a geomancer as I can be. So you can the Druid sticks is the term that gets used for them a lot. I don't know why. I think it's an overlap with Ogum or Ogham. You meant to say that, but yeah, they're great. Sticks I really like because again, if you have the single dot on one side and the double dots on the other, when you throw them, you literally have the form of the figure in front of you. And there is some implicit image magic stuff in geomancy that you are creating an image of that fate. And just as an image of a man punching his boss could be a martial image, so too that figure of the young warrior of Pua of 1121, that itself is also an image of the things that it is sympathetically talking about. This is where divination tools become utilized in operative spellcraft and sorcery, right? Where you don't just decide that the sun is your significator. It's marked in the ritual of divination, and now it's a sympathetic link to that thing you're trying to do, and therefore you might take that card and carry it around with you or do things with it, right? Very folk magic.
Right.
So you can use a variety of tools that generate odds or evens. So Agrippa says you can flip coins. He says like people use coins like for heads and tails. He says they use dice. Crucially, he also talks about polyhedral dice as well. So for all of my Dungeons and Dragons fellow nerds, if you have dice that are lying in a corner forlorn, your D12 cries out to be useful. You can utilize any of those. Agrippa specifically says he actually gets into the stuff of the elemental nature of the platonic solids. So the polyhedrals that are formed out of triangles, I think it is, or 2 triangles stacked into a square for cubes. They're all assigned to an element, and as the lines of the 4 lines of a figure are also attributed to the elements as well as each figure having a fundamental elemental identity. That Pua, that young warrior, is a fiery figure, unsurprisingly, in most ways of reading it. Geomancers get pretty particular about their correspondences and are often very different from one another, interestingly. When you have that pattern of energy present, you are attempting to get at what it's doing, and you're attempting to get behind the wheel of it rather than hit by the car of it. That's where the craft of divination comes in, and those kinds of things. You can literally roll, Agrippa says, a D4, a tetrahedron for the fire line. That tetrahedron is regarded as the fundamental shape of fire. Likewise, a D8 for the air line, a D20 icosahedron for the water line, and a D6 for the earth line. And that has the advantage that you can throw them and know what each dice is doing on each line, rather than 4 dice that are the same that you then have to work out. Is that odd on the top, or is that one on the top? People sometimes do them in colors as well to correspond them to the elements. There's a big practice in Ramal of using, again, my accent is terrible, Kira. They are 4 dice that are put on a spindle, and you spin them round. They're on an axis, and you spin them round, and they're either marked in dots 1 to 4, and again you use them for odd or even, or they're literally marked with half the figure, and you spin 2 of them and then and put them down, and they instantly generate the 4 mothers. So you use 2 of those spindle dice. Other things people use, I've heard of a Calabrian form of coin divination that's using 4 coins and slamming them down on a tabletop. Pubs seems people practice it in a lot. That looks to me like a kind of geomancy. I haven't found, I've only found tantalizing bits and pieces of that. Again, if we're looking at wider world traditions of where these practices spread even wider than European forms, Dr. Stephen Skinner's terrestrial astrology on the history of geomancy has a bunch of stuff on world geomancy, like Sikidi in Madagascar and things like that. Other forms of this practice. There's a Filipino form of it, I believe, as well. That's a tiny bit different, but still fundamentally a kind of geomancy. I'm trying to think of other techniques. Then you've got all the augury stuff you can do. So I think Crowley is famous for sitting outside a cafe in Paris and doing it by male and female presenting people walking past him. And so, if you see, female presenting are odd and male presenting are even, and then you wait for 4 people to go past you and that's your figure. I've done it through the random numbers that get printed on the bottom of bus tickets before now. When I have augured and done ritual and been the next 4 numbers I see are going to be the answer to this figure I need. How else? I know I have a student and client who is developing a system of divining specifically by crows, and the different, not just the numbers of crows, but like their behavior and things like that, that's starting to inform that she pulls different figures from. I'm trying to think of some of the other wacky ways people divine. The technique of squilling is, which sounds like a horrible thing you'd be arrested for doing in public. The term is for when you do the equivalent of making the marks in the sand with a stick with pen and paper instead. It's generally see squilling referring to like doing things in sand or dirt, but I guess it's the same process. And you're making marks without counting them, often by praying to distract yourself. And then you're tallying them up afterwards. And that starts to get into, there are all sorts of other object-based divinations at that point where you are, you can do it by pendulum and things like that. There's also other forms include like using saint medals. There's a tool called the Chain of St. Michael that emerges in the 60s and 70s out of Italy and claims to be an ancient Italian practice, but seems to have an awful lot in common down to translating in exactly the same word order as a bunch of Botanica chapbooks on Ifa and on West African divination. It seems they got some of those early publications and made an Italian version of this West African practice and then pretended it was ancient Italian. The kicker of this is that I experimented with a Chain of St. Michael after looking at the history account and being like, I'm not sure about this. I may be wrong. It may in fact be an ancient Italian practice. And if you're listening and your family practiced it for 100 years, please reach out to me. I would be delighted to be wrong and learn more about that. The kicker is that the Chain of St. Michael really works. It's really good, especially if you have a relationship with St. Michael already.
Right.
It's odd to me that Michael gets picked. I mean, it's not. It's an Italian practice, so of course, you're going to have Michael, but it's Gabriel in the Arabic tradition and also in the Christian one that's said to have first transmitted geomancy as the annunciator, right, as the messenger of God, is said to have transmitted it to Adam or to Enoch or Idris. So all sorts of angels present themselves as helpful. There's a million ways. Oh, that was the other way. So there's squilling, there's making individual marks. One of the other ways I've seen is dividing the paper into quadrants with a crossroads in the middle, and then taking the pen or pencil for a walk and a one-line drawing where it goes over itself, and then taking then counting how many times the line crosses itself.
Okay.
In each of those quadrants for your for your numbers that get turned into odd or even that get turned into the figure. Again, this is way easier with a piece of paper in front of someone or scribbling in the dirt with a stick than it is trying to describe it purely through audio. My hands are going crazy. But yeah, there are a number of ways. The concept is that any sufficiently prayed over and ritualized approach to the fundamental coherence of divination, of this epistemological process of generating information and processing that into wisdom, ideally, is valid. If you can make odds or evens with it, then you can use it.
Which is awesome. And that's one of the things that I found so incredible, because I was walking around the other day and I was like, I can literally, if there's any either or, I can do it for any situation. As long as I know I have a piece of paper, I can make a little shield. Yeah, it's really quite incredible. All right. I would love to see how the sausage gets made here. So for people, make sure that you go to the website, make sure you have those 16 figures in front of you, and make sure that you see that little shield thing. So take us into what would happen, say, if somebody was to, of course, as we have to have our secrets, but take us through what you would do if somebody comes to you for a geomantic reading, Dr. Cummins.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So my standard process for a reading, in my professional practice with clients and things, is usually about an hour, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. I'll do intake. I'll take people through what they're approaching, what's going on right now. If something has changed from the time they booked it to the time we're actually reading, has the thing changed? Are there more moving factors to pay attention to now? Is it the same thing we're reading on? We'll frame the question. It's very important in geomancy to phrase the question exactly so, because that very much depends on. So the classic here is medical charts, that matters of health are assessed mostly. There's a bunch of places that we look for things that are relevant, but the main one is the sixth house, which is the nature of the disease. It is not the nature. It's sometimes called the house of health, and we go to Valetudo for that, but it's actually mapping the disease. And so the figure we want to see there is a missio, the loss of the illness. You are recovering. That's our ideal. If you've got a cold and you want to know how long am I going to be miserable and bunged up, right? We want that missio there, because it's not charting good health. That's not your good health that you're losing. That's the bad thing that is affecting your health that you're cleansing off you, that you're taking off you. So we need to assess the exact nature, the exact phrasing of the question and write it down. We need to assess what houses we're going to look at. And again, I do that beforehand, so we're not distracted by some fancy figure being like, oh, maybe I should pay attention to this as well. No, we should go in knowing what's the nature of the question and what are the moving parts of this. You want to know about, I don't know, where are you feeling in a plateau with your spiritual practice, right? So we can look to the ninth house for spirituality, alignments, divination, study, like formal study. We can look to the eighth for the witchcrafts you do. That's one way of reading the eighth, the operative spellcraft you do, as well as the activity of more activating and activated, one might even say restless spirits around you. You might also look, I like the fourth for ancestors, for settled spirits around you, and for family. So we would assess that we would look to those things first. Then we would start setting the chart. So for me, I like the first figure, because that literally goes to the first place, right, of the 16 of the 15 plus one sometimes places of the shield chart as a 15 card spread, if we want to frame it like that. So the first figure that's generated goes in the first place, is the first house, which is vita, which is the life of the querent, the person asking the question, the client, if it's a client, you, if you're the one consulting geomancy directly. And so this comes from their hands. It indicates like what's going on with them right now, or what's very recent with them. It's not always a fundamental, this is the nature of this person forever and in all time. And I like that to come from the client's hands. Usually flip a coin. I usually get them to use a coin that they don't mind throwing away, like a quarter or loose change, because there are ways. Again, that coin, once you've done ritual, is a magical link back to the reading, back to the answer. And especially when it's marking them, you can use it to clean off things that we want to avoid. You can also use it to lock down and secure things like blessings that we need to really nail down. So the temporary tools, the fungible tools, if you want to frame it like that, that we can use to generate a figure are great too. So they'll generate the first figure. Then I will throw the next three figures. Those four figures are referred to as the mothers, because they birth the rest of the chart.
People are going from left to right here. I want people to understand when Dr. Al says Vita, that is actually on the far top right. So we're going from right to left here, which is the opposite of reading, and the chart kind of fills out from that quarter and goes all the way through.
It's said to be I like it as a respect and a homage to the Arabic roots of the system. Ultimately, that it's read right to left. Yes. So a shield chart is 15 places. The first 12 are the house of the heavens. The final 3 are the 2 witnesses and the judge, which are referred to as the court. And then the chart, those 15 places are laid out with 8 on the first row, 4 on the second, 2 on the third, and the final judge on the fourth. So it's also itself a 4-part structure, interestingly.
Yeah.
It's also, you'll notice, distilling down from 8 to 4 to 2 to 1, right? It's literally distilling down as we add those, as the first 2 mothers are added. We'll get to that in a second. Okay. Right. So we generated our mothers. We actually put our tools down now. We only generate the first 4 figures by, quote, random numbers, rolling dice, sortilege, augury, whatever we're using to generate odd or even numbers. We're generating 16 odd or even numbers because we're getting 4 lots of 4. We then have our 4 mother figures. They then birth the 4 daughters. The 4 mothers and the 4 daughters then produce the 4 nieces, which are present in the second line. So we've filled out our top 8. Then we filled out our second row's 4 places that they're referred to as the nieces, sometimes the nephews. And then those are again distilled down to the 2 witnesses, and then they distill down to the judge. The way we get most of how we distill down is exactly that process of addition I talked about. You take the 2 sets of figures, you line up their lines, and you count, you add them up across them, and it's going to produce like 1 + 1 or 1 + 2 or 2 + 1 or 2 + 2, right? As we went through. That's how we set most of the chart. The daughters are set in one other way. We use one other technique, and it's line ripping. So remember when I said that each of the lines of an individual figure are elemental? So Pua, even though it's 1, 1, 2, 1, that fiery martial fighty figure, that first fiery line is single, that second airy line is single, the watery line is double, and the earthy line is single. The way we generate the first daughter, the fifth figure, the figure that goes in the fifth place, is to read only the first lines of each of the four mothers. So we read across, not down. Like I've been talking about the figures as being like 1, 1, 2, 1 from top to bottom. We read the the fiery line of the first mother, the fiery line of the second mother, the fiery line of the third mother, the fiery line of the fourth mother, which means the first daughter is made of all of the fire. So it's the fieriest part of the daughters. And we do that with the four of them. So we generate these elemental extractions and syntheses. So that's how we generate the four daughters there. So we now have our 8 figures in that first row of the shield chart. And then we do the addition thing for everything else. We take a figure, we add it, we find out what Agrippa calls the parity or imparity of the lines, like if they make odd or even together. And then we generate more figures from that. And that's pretty much it. There is another technique which I rather cumbersomely call non-consecutive addition, where we aren't just adding. So in a shield chart, like we've just generated our mothers and our daughters, then we would take the first mother and the second mother, again on the right-hand side, and we would add those together to produce the first niece, which goes underneath it. Remember that second row on the shield chart is only 4. So that goes there. Non-consecutive addition is where we don't take just consecutive like the first mother and the second mother. We take the first mother and say the seventh, the figure in the 7th place, in the 7th house, and we add those together. Why do we do that? To chart the interrelationality of different moving parts. This turns up a lot in love readings in the early modern records that I've looked at. So not only looking at the 7th for like what kind of boyfriend is he going to be like or husband, but also seeing what the boyfriend is marked in the 7th and adding that non-consecutively to what's present in the 4th, what's present for your dad. How will him and my dad get on? Right? Like complicated questions of interrelational and interpersonal like engagements and blockages and activities. And so we can take any element of the chart the pattern that it marks, that it is marked by, and compare it to any other pattern that's present here. We can look to see like what relationality there may be between any particular part of a moving scenario as well, which is just fundamentally very useful. One of the main ways that we see non-consecutive addition surviving in modern geomancy is the setting of a 16th figure, a 16th place on the chart. I've said a couple of times that a geomantic figure, a geomantic shield is 15 places. It is. You can set another one, a 16th place, which is referred to as the reconciler or the sentence sometimes, or it's even sometimes called the super judge. How you generate it is by taking, it's very much an alpha and omega. You take the first figure that was generated, which marks the client. You take the last figure, which was generated, which is the judge, the answer. So what do you make when you see what happens when the client meets the judgment? You get the result of what they're going to do about this reading.
The super judge.
Yeah, the sentence, the thing that the judge speaks, the result. So it's not just what the judge speaks; it's the result of what's going to happen to and with the client, right? And that tells us not just what's going to happen, but how the client is going to take it. The news itself might be great. Yeah, you're absolutely going to get promotion in a month. It's going to be great. Things are really working in place. But depending on what they're marked with, and depending on what kind of good news it is, that can produce a terrible result for whatever reason. Just because the reading is good doesn't mean the client's gonna integrate that usefully, right? Just as the first place can be read for how the client will take, for how you talk to the client, because it marks what's present, what that pattern of energy will allow through to their heads and what it won't. Clients marked with Tristitia in the first with sorrow have a tendency towards only seeing the negative. You can tell them 5 times, like, here are good things about what's going to happen or what's going on now. And they will focus on that one thing when you're like, oh, this isn't so great, right? So you have to be very careful about how. So again, geomancy, a chart read properly offers us a vast set of suggestions on how to break this news, not just what the news is. And so some clients need to be told, like, the same thing 4 times. Some clients want the bad news first and won't believe you about the good news, like the opposite, like, or won't believe you about the bad news, will only focus on the good. And so you learn how to do it by doing it as well. And it offers the diviner a bunch of things to bear in mind about how best they can provide best service for their clients. Also, how they can protect themselves. There are some particular configurations around, like, the client is lying to you. They don't have a grandma anymore. They're asking about their grandma because they're trying to trick you, right? They're setting you down a road that isn't true. And again, if a particular configuration turns up, then you can be like, is this real? Or how you assess that. Or if you're just like, I'm sorry, I have to, however you take that then, right? Like, is again, working on the craft of your divining.
So you have the 12 houses. That's kind of like, if you look at the shield, that is the more square part of the shield. And then at the very bottom, you have the left witness, the judge in the middle, and the right witness. Should you advise people, if they actually go through, get a couple of the books and they figure out how to fill out a shield chart, would you suggest for people to try and get away from this idea that, like, the judge is the only answer and that's it, and the rest of the chart is just to get to the judge? Because the witnesses play a role. You could even look at the like the mothers, the first 2 mothers and the first niece is almost like 2 witnesses and a judge unto themselves. Like, you
triads,
Yeah. So when you begin, yes, it's good to be able to fill out the whole shield chart. And yes, the judge is there as like a kind of answer, but there's also much more to be read to the chart, as Dr. Cummins has gone through. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think the court is a great place to start. And I think knowing your 16 figures is absolutely eventually crucial for that. But just learning how to set a whole chart, which also, because it's about odds and evens, also has a bunch of, like, again, I guess we could argue they are mathsy, they're algorithmy, but you don't need to know how they work. You just need to notice them. But there are certain checks and balances that a judge can only be one of the 8 figures, and it's always going to have an even number of points.
I want to put a pin in that for people. Yeah. So when you fill out your first shield chart, maybe say that you're doing this for you got the books, again, you filled out your first chart. If you check the judge, this is what's actually really fun and really cool. And if the judge has an odd number of dots, you're counting every single dot of the figure that is the judge, and it's odd, you've done something wrong on the chart. You screwed up somewhere. And yes, it only has about 8. Only half of the figures are available as the judge.
And what that means is that that judge is informed by the 2 witnesses. It matters which order they come in as well. So what's the example I normally use? Conjunctio moving to acquisitio produces Fortuna Major. So conjunctio, the figure of mercurial figure of the crossroads of union, of coming together, if only briefly, ships in the night, moving between worlds, a very liminal figure, the X that marks the spot, the X on the contract that you can't read, Mercury, the 2-faced devil at the crossroads. That figure moving to acquisitio, gain, that Jupiterian business up front, produces Fortuna Major, success, victory. That's one court configuration with the conjunctio as the right witness, as the first witness. Remember, we're reading from right to left. That would be make good deals, make you a bunch of money, and leads to success. Right? We read first witness, second witness, judge. It's a different court configuration to have acquisitio as the right first witness, moving to conjunctio. It still produces, because those dots are still the same. It's still going to produce Fortuna Major, but it's a different kind of victory and success now, because Fortuna Major is also hard work. And whereas conjunctio moving to, as a first witness, moving to acquisitio is good deals make good money, acquisitio moving to conjunctio is kind of more money, more problems, or at least more money, more meetings. Right. It's handshakes and like meetings about meetings at that point, which is also a kind of success, but it's the hard won success. And there, that Fortuna Major is in that configuration. That Fortuna Major is referring more to the one step, the 2 steps forward, 1 step back of the feel of the hard work of Fortuna Major, the rising sun that illuminates the field of work ahead of you for the day, right? As opposed to Fortuna Major is also the figure of like sovereignty and great victory. So what that means is it matters which order the figures of the witnesses fall in, like whether or not we get that pattern first, moving to that pattern, we get, or vice versa. What that means is there are 128 true court configurations, 128 configurations of witnesses and judge. So again, from 16 figures, we can start to build up a big deck of cards that, like, that first witness, acquisitio, moving to conjunctio, fortuna major judge, is different to its opposite, right? It might have some similarities in some cases, but it's going to emphasize different things that figure also answers in. And so on the one hand, yeah, you can, it's belying the complexity that is available to you and the nuance that you can get at, to just treat the judge as what you get at the end of doing all this damn adding of points together, and then are like yes or no. The point is that it spits out the yes or no, or the maybe, and then you assess everything else. So you start. So I recommend starting with the judge, but also with the court. And you can kind of read the court as a 3-card summary of the rest of the thing as well. The first witness can be where they are right now. The second can be what's coming up, and the judge can be what to do about it, right? Or it can be what you're doing at the moment. That means that can reflect that things are going well currently and may or may not be in the future, right? And here's what to do about it. Yeah. And then you can assess the particularities of why that's the case by looking at, this recommends, I'm looking for a new job. This recommends, quitting your job immediately so you have more time to do it, right? Why is that? Well, we can mark that your boss is getting increasingly, I don't know, we're dealing with so many violent bosses. Your boss is getting increasingly shitty. And so, like, it's going to be a bad scene for you. It gives you more information. So starting with the court is great. And then I would say moving to the quesited houses, the ones you've agreed to look at, which show the particularities of the people and the situations and things. You can also start to look the things like working out where to look, where we didn't know we needed to look. One of those is the via puncti, the way of the points.
The way of the points. I love this.
Quote advanced techniques. Yes. They're not necessarily that advanced. They don't turn up in every chart. They turn up in charts that have a judge with a single dot in the fire line. And owing to the maths of that, that means that there will be a figure above that of the 2 figures of the 2 witnesses that were combined to produce the judge. One of those will have a single fire line as well, as will one of the figures of the 2 that generated that witness from the nieces, as will 2 of the mothers that generated that niece that had it. So you can trace it all the way back to the top line of the mothers and the daughters. And the via puncti is said to show underlying factors that you may not be aware of. That's where we can get that answer of, what do I do to get a new job? Talk to your dad. My dad doesn't know anything about this, but this chart says there's an underlying factor that will get you what you need. So they're not present in every chart, but there are ways we can assess those that's helpful. And then, the part of fortune and the index, for my money, are ways of nominating houses that might be exactly the houses we were already looking at, in which case it says, you're right. Your approach to this is accurate. That is the concern, or that is the blessing. The index is said to be the spiritual center of the chart, or like focus of the chart, whatever that means. And the part of fortune is the grounded way of like manifesting that. And they give you, they just give you a lot more hints and tips. I also like, in terms of interpretive techniques, including if people aren't quesiting matters of the 11th or 12th houses specifically, so the 11th benefactor, networks of support, hopes, good secrets as well, or the 12th, carceris, restriction, debts, literal prison, the legal prison, curses. If people aren't asking about either of those things, I'll read what's present in the 11th and 12th as general eudaimon and cacodaimon of the chart, as like generally what will help moving forward and generally what you should be wary of and may hinder. So we get a gradation of nuance of like definitively yes or no about the thing, and then why, and then because of this, and so you should do this because that will be good for this and will stoke this good thing. And again, ideally as a diviner, I am attempting to get people behind the wheel of the patterns that are playing out in their lives, as opposed to hit by the car of them.
Very cool. Yeah, I would suggest for anybody who really loves, or at least this is starting to register with you, start out by doing your first geomantic reading. You might need to read a book or two just to like get like how exactly to get these lines for the figure, but it actually becomes quite intuitive eventually, and then you'll be putting dots down like nobody's business. I would suggest definitely doing a shield chart to begin with, but when people look up geomancy online, there's going to be this other chart that comes up called a house chart. What are the differences between the shield chart and the house chart?
A house chart is the older way of doing all astrological charts. So we're familiar now with like even astrologers who don't consider themselves, quote, modern astrologers and that school of astrology, astrologers who are alive now are generally setting them in the circle diagram, right?
Right.
With the houses around them. The older form is a square, where it's less a slice of a circular pie and more a triangle in a corner. You can set because it's the 12 houses, you can set a shield chart in an astrological house chart. That's the houses we're talking about here. So the 12 go around the outside, and then the 3 figures of the court go on the inside, in a little square on the inside. They are useful for layering extra astrological information and interpretation. So there are whole schools of combining a horary chart, like of the heavens, with a geomantic chart. And again, the person to talk to about this is Sam. Sam knows an awful lot about this, or an awful lot about assigning extra layers of astrological interpretation by putting the band of the zodiac around as well. So you have not just Pua in the 4th house, but Pua in Cancer in the 4th house with the moon conjunct it, right? Like, so we have a wealth of way more information, which can be amazingly useful and can offer great nuance. I don't tend to do that. I think geometric charts are complicated enough as they are. Right. The more you read on them, the more you're like, oh, there's way more things this thing could mean. So they can be helpful for that. I would say that I use exclusively shield charts because certain processes are easier to track. The Via Puncti, for instance, is literally about tracing a path from the judge back to one of the mothers or daughters, and that's really difficult to do, keeping it in your head in a house chart. The house charts there are a variety of, like, again, techniques that we nabbed from astrologers, like aspects, like where this figure springs to another, like where this figure is present in another place as well in the chart, and you can then start doing sextiles and things like that, which some people love and are full of, there's ways of doing it. That's not the way I generally tend to do things. I think if you know, like, that's why I bang on about, like, the 16 figures in 12 houses is 192 answers. There's 128 true court configurations. There's also another 120. In theory, there are 256 ways in which 2 figures can add together to produce another figure, if it matters which is the first and which is the second. Right. And so if you're thinking about triads, if you just want to do what I call like a short throw, if you want to throw 2 figures, like while you're in the street, about like, hey, this is an interesting looking rock. Is it haunted? Is it good haunted? You can throw 2 figures and work out the result. But because that hasn't gone through 4 layers of addition to be a final judge, it could be any of those 256 different court configurations, those triads, those any combination of those things. So for me, there's a wealth there of exploring the nuance of how this figure behaves with this figure, especially about particular questions. So it's about assessing 128 different things, which also have different answers depending on what the question is and how you phrase it. So for me, there's plenty of information there. But again, it comes from getting to know the figures and the spirits and the virtues of the things that they cohere and allure. Yeah. I hope I'm not making it sound like overly complicated or, it's too hard for you. No, it's a very welcoming system, I find. Like, and if you are learning to first trying to do it, get a book, get a lookup table, check some of Sam's blogs, and start throwing charts to assess. Give yourself a break. Don't try and work out, how do I solve world hunger in my first readings, Assess some simple things that help you make decisions and have perspectives on stuff. One of my favorite phrasings of question is starting with what to bear in mind about working towards leaving this job and getting a better job. What to bear in mind about my spiritual practice over the next 3 months. What to bear in mind about these things, because that gives you an option for the court to say things are looking good or things are not looking good, as well as the moving parts of like what to do about them. Yeah. We can read a chart not just to tell what's going on, but also for the remediations. Like the 10th, which is regnum, the house of your life kingdom, is used in medical charts for like what's the specific medicine or medical regimen that the client should go for. In questions of like work, it's your boss, but in questions of like your life sovereignty, it can literally be like what what candles do I need to burn to which planet to get me in alignment that this works. Right. You can divine on what magic to do about things.
Sure. I think when I revisited just this last little while, I revisited geomancy, the thing that was incredibly attractive to me is the actual like shield chart and being able to look at just the massive amount of like combinations. And there's quite a bit of nuance. I mean, again, if you know a lot about astrology and you know a lot about elements, it's going to help you a bit more. But even if you just know about the 16 figures, you can still, there's so much to read into a single chart that it's actually quite incredible. And it's very beautiful. I'm going to say, once you start to work with it, and I'm actually going to say the word play. Once you start to play with a chart, and just give yourself license to not be like, you know what, I don't need to do everything by the book. You can learn very quickly. I'm just going to say that.
You start to develop some real senses of the idiosyncrasy of the figures and their spirits and the planets as well. Like, okay, so great example here is Albus. I read it as an airy figure. It's sometimes read as a watery figure, depending on the geomancy you're talking to. It's 2212. It's a mercurial figure. It's not conjunctio. It's not Mercury at the crossroads. It's Mercury the librarian, Mercury the archivist, Mercury the keeper of the bones of the works of the bodies of the dead. It is ingenious. It is scholarly. It is quiet. It's a librarian. It likes things being nice and quiet. It has certain elements where it's a bit more like the ivory tower and has some elements of like academic snobbery to it, but it's also very it's delighted to speak about its favorite topics and is very like generous with that information as well. It also, in very specific circumstances, in certain houses and with other things around it, is horribly vituperative and gets real nerd rage. Like when you get their favorite thing wrong, like that didn't happen in that episode of Star Trek. How dare you get out of my house, right? Like there's that little element of Albus, otherwise the scholar, right? The sage. This figure of great wisdom and the tranquility that underlies and is a prerequisite for good judgment, right? But in certain situations, it also has a temper, right? About its nerd loves, right? It will nerd rage about its nerd loves,
right?
And that for me tells me more about like myself as a scholar practitioner, about Mercury, about certainly about like dead scholars and like ghosts and like tutelary shades and things like that. And so these things don't have to be, oh God, I've got to learn 800 different things that this mercurial figure might mean that don't have any relation to each other. But understanding the personality of these figures means that we get to understand that, like, oh, a homebody like Albus that wants to stay home and read a book in the fifth, in the house of like pleasure and recreation, is probably going to be more about like reading a good novel than it is about like tying one on and painting the town red. Right. So we can develop from understanding the personality of the figures, like how it's going to behave in these different houses, in these different contexts. And that again is where it's intuitive, I guess, but it's less like, oh, it will just come to you, and more like, no, you start to see a bigger connected up picture.
Yeah. 100%. What do you make of certain geomantic traditions that have made their way down through the years? These are things like, if you get Rebus or Cauda Draconis in the first house, you scrap the reading, you don't do the reading anymore, you tear it up, you set fire to the room you're in. Maybe not that bad, but like, what do you make?
Yeah.
What do you make? Do these traditions still stand? How much validity does somebody like you who's been doing this for well over a decade? What do you make of this stuff?
I have some firm opinions about it, unsurprisingly. Okay. These traditions, at least Sam and I have been referring to them as halted charts that get halted, that get stopped, that something falls that is like, nope, not today, Geomancy Satan. They are the two figures that can fall in the first house, the first like thing of the chart are, as you say, Cauda Draconis, a figure assigned to both the malefics and to the south node of the moon. The dragon's tail, a figure of destruction, violence, slander, arson, iron and knives and a bad time, bad news bears. And Rubius, which is the Scorpio figure, is the other martial one. It's a figure of self-deceit very often. It is a figure of, you'll read it and it says like vice, sin, depravity. So how do I talk about this? For a start, I said not all times are best to ask the question, right? It seems that sometimes spirits are busy or doing something else. There are other like environmental factors. It's generally not recommended that you read in a storm, which is interesting. Like weather conditions can, in my experience, affect the clarity of the reading, and often that's in looking back over these charts. That's often user error. That's often on me, right? The chart was right, but I couldn't see what the pieces were. I couldn't see how they related, and partly because there was a storm going on. Sometimes that's a standard part of like not all times are a good time to ask. Likewise, not all questions have a definitive yes or no at this time. VIA as a judge infamously means things are too up in the air at the moment to say one way or another how it's going to land, which can be great for us like spell workers, because like, oh great, I only need to prod it a little bit to get it where I want to go. The idea is that you don't read a cauda because it's a figure of destruction, and it tends to connote that the client has already made up their mind about a bunch of things and might not really listen to you. In my experience, that doesn't seem to be so true. I do read cauda charts that start with cauda, because this isn't about like, oh, hashtag no bad vibes, right? This isn't about like, we're not looking at bad things that happen. We're only going to talk about the good stuff. That's like bullshit, right? As you go to your doctor and they're like, I don't like using the C word. Like, I don't either, but like, if I have it, I need to fucking know, right? It's not helpful to just look at the positive, right? That said, it's also not helpful to just focus on the negative. But for my money, cauda as a first figure in Vita, in the first place, the first mother, is not sufficient to halt the chart. The client might have very clear ideas, and you may find a hard edge where they're like, fuck no about something. But then no, in my experience, they do okay. Rubeus, on the other hand, gets into some image magic territory. When you have marked the image of self-deception as the first thing you do in a reading. So for a while, as a sun sign Scorpio, I felt this was like deeply, anti-Scorpio propaganda. And I was like, I'm a sex positive dude. Like this medieval mindset that it's crawling out of has all sorts of stuff that we don't need to continue doing. There's plenty of babies that are useful to throw out with the, patriarchal bathwater. Not all sex is inherently wrong or makes baby Jesus cry. Maybe this whole like fear the blood and the sex and the wine, women, and song that Rubeus can signify is not a bad thing. Maybe I should read these charts that start with Rubeus. And in my experience, every chart that I read that started with Rubeus was not only inaccurate, was not only like wrong, it told me stuff that didn't happen or said stuff wouldn't happen that did. It led me to make decisions that were explicitly harmful for me. I've seen it. The example I've seen before is like a chart that was active, like the only way your boss is, and again, like this is perhaps why I keep using this example, the only way your boss is going to respect you is if you physically punch them. You have to get into an actual fist fight and then they'll respect you. That's how you, Rubeus is absolutely the figure that's like, what you need to do? Just turn up drunk.
Like a horribly written 80s sitcom. That's the answer. Yeah, punch your boss.
Right. Do something violent, get out of your heads, be self-destructive. So in my experience, it's not just that it's wrong, it's that it's actively harmful very often. It gives us advice that is not just inaccurate, but like puts us in a worse position. So I will absolutely halt a Rubeus chart. If a client throws one of those, we will assess what cleansing they need to do, and I will reschedule the session for the following day, usually. If at that point they're like, what the hell is this? Then I offer a refund at that point.
Give their money back.
Sure. Yeah. But I do a bunch of, we assess whether it's a serious thing or not. Reasons Rubeus have fallen. That whole thing about like all health and safety rules are written in blood. Like the daft questions I have to ask because like one time it wasn't daft, it was exactly what needed to be done. Have you recently had sex in a graveyard? Like, I went through asking so many questions why this client kept throwing a Rubeus. One of the other ones was, again, I hope I'm not breaking confidentiality here. I'm not going to say who these are. One of the others, I went through all of these things like, do you have open wounds? But are you like currently on any like severely affecting like medication, or like are you like drunk, are you altered, blah blah blah, going through these things. And then I'm like, are you actively cursing anyone at the moment? Because again, that's not necessarily a sign that that you can't read now. Only bad people curse, and so God's angry at you and the geomancers won't return your phone calls. It's that in throwing a bunch of cursey energy around, which you may be entirely justified in doing, it's harder to get a clear signal. It's not necessarily a value judgment. It's not necessarily a you're a bad person. It's that too many things are going on at the moment. And I asked the client, like, are you cursing anyone at the moment? And they just turned the camera around, and there were like 10 like horrible looking black candles burning on horrible looking like jars, and they were like, yeah, a couple people. I'm like, okay, I'm not saying you're wrong in doing that, but can we read in a different room? And as soon as they went into a different room, yeah, we're fine, I get it. I've got the signal. But so it can happen for a bunch of reasons, and for things that you may be entirely justified in cursing that shitty boss or that shitty ex-boyfriend or what have you. Like, I'm not here to make a judgment on that, but I'm here to say that, like, if you are filling the air and your work currently with that, it's going to be very hard for me to get at certain of your spirits and to measure, and to send my spirits to measure things and to be able to tell you about them. One of the interesting parts of this like image magic component of it is that you are meant to mark the figure and then break the charts. Like you said, like set fire to the room, like salt the earth, change names, burn your fingerprints off. A lot of that is because you have just marked the haunted doorway of self-deception and vice. And not just vice in terms of like something that a priest is going to point at you and whack their finger about, but the thing that you know is not good for you to do that you do anyway, when we are not good to ourselves in various ways. You've just marked that. So you have to physically break it, is the idea. And it's even said at various points, like in certain geomantic handbooks, like they start to talk about that thing and then they're like, and I'm not going to talk about Rubius anymore. Like, because again, talking about it enough brings it into the room eventually, just like it being marked, it falling coheres that, because the chart is an image of the result and is therefore has a talismanic magnetism and sympathy for the results that it is representing, it is mapping, it is expressing, it is articulating. And so, I take Rubius very seriously. And generally it's just salt baths. It's just take a salt bath, avoid red, which again, wearing certain colors and things like that is so tied up into the early modern remediations from geomancy, because it can be read so humorally and so elementally. Red alert, Rubius says, like, it's good for you to wear white. It's good for you to be has that context of calming. Albus, the figure of like that tranquility, that sagacity, that quietness of the library. So it has all sorts of ways that we can do very mundane things about avoiding those, wearing certain colors, not wearing certain colors. Food, sleep and exercise, really arcane concepts here that can help you regulate the dynamic equilibrium that's said to underlie good health and good magic.
For sure. So you're not just, as people who have listened to this podcast know, we talked about grimoires beforehand. If anybody's familiar with your work, you're not just a geomancer. You do all sorts of things. And we could probably do a full episode about this, but geomancy and magic. Tell us, how do these figures, how can they enter into some kind of a magical practice?
Well, if we take that example for a start, like when we mark Rubius as a first figure, we mark it in a way which seem like we're producing an image of it, right? Mm-hmm. Then when we get rid of that image, and again, what I think we're doing is we're materializing a general bad vibe so that it's in one place. So we're binding it by marking it, and then we're tearing it up, or I take that paper and dispose of it in water. I'll flush it down the toilet very often. Again, real arcane stuff. Disposal by water. It's a watery figure most of the time, depending on how you read it. But we could take that same technology and utilize it for like positive ends. So to mark Acquisitio on your prosperity bottle, that you add money drawing herbs to, and that you shake with coins in it and you burn blue candles on it on Jupiter hours in order to like cohere and call those Acquisitio, those virtues and spirits of Acquisitio, of gain, right? So geomantic magic for me emerges from utilizing the categories that are utilized in divination, the lots of fate, the pieces of fate, and reorganizing them via sympathetic means. That, like, I think of the figures as, like I said earlier, as haunted doorways that allow and cohere various spirits and virtues of the thing that they map and that they articulate. And so a lot of the time that boils down to what's the image of success here? that we can utilize? What's the figure that's or the sets of figures that are coming forward to patronize and support, patronize in a good way, patronize and support the client, right? Here's what you can, like, here's the and not just the one weird candle spell you need to do, but like ways in which you can behave in manners that are effective. The other way, I would say, working with the haunted doorways of the figures in more operative spellcraft is to spell them out. So so typically, if I'm doing a poor working, again, the young warrior for protection, very good for protection work, I might take 5 red candles and carve them with sigils of Mars and Pua, and then burn them in the form of Pua. So 1 candle on the first line, 1 on the second, 2 on the third, and 1 on the fourth, right? That's our Pua, which is sometimes said to be spear-shaped.
Yes.
Which I like, because the spear side is the male side at a wedding and things like that. And it does have some context of like male dead as well, or dead of your father's line sometimes, or young boys. So being able to spell those out in a relevant elemental modality is not so different, for my money, from advice when you are summoning spirits into stones, for instance. So the excellent book of the Art of Magic, in one of its notai, says like, hey, if you're summoning a fiery type spirit into your stone and it's not turning up, and you want to torture it into turning up, put it in water and it'll really piss it off until it turns up. It'll hurt it or it'll vex it until the spirit turns up. Now, I find that a very antagonistic approach, but there's a fundamental mechanism of action going on there. So what happens if I put a fiery spirit in a candle, or I give it candles for it to dwell in, as not binding it into it, but like, hey, you like this stuff. Here's a thing that you like, and that you can be more powerful and more coherent and clearer in our communication and your activity. So for my money, you're doing that. So candles, for Via, that figure of the moon's dynamism, it's 4 single dots, 1, 1, 1, 1. That's the terrible mic check there. That I have done workings where I will take 4 shot glasses and put various waters and boozes in them, and then prepare them in various ways, and then take that water and do things with it. So it's been set in a form that the spirits of the figure have then been called through. Yeah, again, the wealth in which the parts of fate don't just tell you what's happening, they also seem to call the energies and entities that help those things happen. And so it can look very surprisingly simple. It can look incredibly simple, but there's also a wealth of materia that can be employed when something is an offering to the spirits of the thing, and when you are asking them to empower that thing is interesting to me. When materia and ingredients become the tools to do the work, that then become a way of facilitating interaction, that the spirit is empowering it as you're empowering it, that it can literally be like evidence of work that's already been done as well. Yeah, geomantic magic for me just keeps giving, partly because geomancy is itself so based in the elements and planets, as well as like expressing something fundamental about these 16 ways that that those things play out. The final thing that I've been very interested in of late is utilizing the angelical language that gets called Enochian, which was channeled by Dr. John Dee and various scryers, including Edward Kelly, and utilizing the language of the angels, which the angels are, well, the Enochian spirits are uncharacteristically clear and open about, like, all of the rest of our stuff is very complicated and mysterious, and we'll say all sorts of things about it. But the language, that's totally the language Adam spoke in the garden. He used it to talk to angels and to God, and pretty much everything from the depths of hell to the highest heavens, from the seas themselves to the sky, will respond to this natural and original language of creation. And so as a ritual language, outside of the particularities and filling in the gaps of like Liber Lagoeth or the Heptarchia itself, or the thing called Gebethal. For my money, the language of the calls is the clearest and most applicable and potent of the things that Dee did. And so I've been utilizing the angelical language in my calls to spirits and virtues of the geomantic figures, and in my divination, and helping me to help remediate a halted chart by Rubius, like banishing it with the language of creation, if we buy its own historiola. Mm-hmm. So yeah, geomancy seems incredibly good at being utilized with other forms of magic as well, I would say. It seems that it's because it's such a firm basis in like the grounded sublunary world that we live in and where all our stuff is. in the grassroots thing of like reminding nature of its networks of interrelationality and exchange and transmission and reception of effect, you know, the naturally organic magical cosmos. It seems geomancy is already so tied into all the lattice of that of course it makes sense that you can also like stir it with these particular bits and pieces. And again, it's part of that like the great acquisitional magpieing of like folk magicians, especially in cunning folk, is like as my dear friend Professor Charles Porterfield, Old Testament conjure doctor down in Texas, says of African American hoodoo and Southern conjure, like if it works for you, it can work for me, right? If I see something working in another thing, like I'm going to want a piece of that because I have to get results, because you know I've got to keep a roof over my head and my cat's in their expensive cat food, you know.
Definitely. Also, what I think was interesting with my reconnection with geomancy over the last month or so is just, it's called terrestrial astrology. I get that, but I love that it's very tactile. If you want it to be, it could be very tactile. It seems very down to earth. It feels more lunar. I mean, I don't want to get too overly specific here, but it seems somewhat sublunar to me in a strange way. But yeah, it's.
I think so. We don't do time, right? So we do care what time it is.
Right.
We care what's going on at the time that you are doing the thing. Are there storms? Is there a ton of like bubbling like black ichor of curse pots going around at the moment? Like we care about space primarily, and we care about the time that we cast. But you know, as Proclus says, and Agrippa loves to quote, time is the motion of the celestial bodies, right? We don't do horary charts. We don't assess time like astrologers do. I think what we're doing is we're assessing space and the possibilities of space in the sublunary world. We aren't so much waiting, you know, and I can get on my soapbox a little bit about this, but we aren't waiting at, you know, we aren't like Neoplatonic crumb begging at the high table of like these Empyrean perfect realms, right?
Yes.
We aren't waiting for like, can I have a crumb of magic, please?
That's right.
From the correct conjunction. And I'm sure a billion astrologers are now like, what's he talking about? He doesn't know anything. There's no proper astrology. But for geomancers, we're already waking the stuff in the sublunary world up and reminding it already has these networks of connections and things. Agrippa says, like, when he's I use this example all the time, when he's talking about like, why bother doing ritual if the sunflower is already full of solar virtue? And he says it's like you wake it up, you remind it that it has this virtue. It is somewhat dormant in the sublunary world. That's why sunflowers aren't constantly firing off fireballs and things like that. And he says, like mustard seeds that can be toasted a little bit, or like your caraway seeds, or you're in a dry pan to like wake them up and make them more flavorful and more potent. So we wake things up. And for me, geomancy is very much about that grassroots, like what's already present here in the sublunary world, and how can I remind it of how powerful and how connected and imbued it already is. There's a line in the prayer of the gnomes from Paracelsus, probably through old Alphonse Louis Constant or Eliphas Levi, about how the marvel in the earth, the marvelous seed of the stars. And that for me is big as well, like the idea of being here and having a history, and that like the planets have already, the secondary intelligences before the throne of the creator have already imbued the world with this myriad of compounded virtues, elementated and planetary and geomantic. And so it's our job to understand the way those things are already talking to each other, and to seek, in that case, to build a wider community in and of these ecologies of spirit that we are part of. And so that, for my money, is why geomancy is like about here and now. It seems to be why it seems more practiced by people that need definitive things rather than arch philosophical, banter or idealist dogma. I think it's grounded, it's practical, it's gnomic, and it has the potential to help us feel more connected to the world we're in, not reaching more distantly for some perfect elsewhere.
I love it. That's so fantastic. I was going to ask, like, why geomancy for you, Dr. A? And I believe you just kind of answered it. This whole episode has just been an answer for why geomancy, truthfully.
Yeah,
so
pretty much that. Yeah, it's super elemental, and that means it's super humoral. My doctoral research was on magical approaches to the emotions, to the passions, and therefore humoral theory. And an awful lot of magic is deeply transactional. It's deeply about how you feel about it. Again, that's not to say it's all about intention, but like the idea of separating spirits and psychology, that only one of these things can be true, would be entirely alien to our early modern forebears. Like spirits affect your psychology, and your psychology affects how you can perceive and interact with spirits. Like that's present in every grimoire if you know what to look for, right? And just as spirits can alter our perception, spirits also are attracted to, disturbing spirits are attracted to disturbed people, right? Again, that's absolutely not to victim blame. That's to say that we are part of a wider ecology and context of as I tell clients cheerily sometimes, more than one thing can be wrong at once, right? That's right. So it's very elemental. It's very humoral, which means it's about the body and about our relationship in embodiment with that which is said to be exopsychic as well as endopsychic, how we are porous beings. Humoral theory keeps mapping for me and keeps helping explain how we are made of what's put into us. Whether that's like, the micro expressions of like angry words that can be heard on the bitter breath, which itself can inform conjuration and things like that, to, exactly what kind of food to eat if I want to work with Venus. These kinds of mixtures are very practical and very, quote, magical, right? The mixture of the two. The ubiquity of sevenfold systems, whether you're into chakras or your crystals in various ways, or lapidary, or your very ceremonial magic, or your arch witchcraft of the seven wandering stars. Like lots of people use planets, so that's a nice lingua franca to be able to compare how your lunary stuff works with other people's lunary stuff. The other big point I would make about geomancy, which I said at the beginning, is hopefully we see a little bit of what I meant by saying it's a dialectic system. That when you have that one figure, that the hero's journey, or at least Luke Skywalker meets Obi-Wan, right? In episode, what will become episode 4, what will later be called A New Hope, right? The young boy, again, our Pua, our young warrior, sets out on a winding road of Via, of the path that changes, and that figure produces Albus, the old man, the supernatural assistant, right? Alec Guinness, Obi-Wan. Hello there. So I'm not just trying to like court favor with the Star Wars fans here. I'm trying to get at the fact that like there's literally a dialectic process going on. A thesis of Pua meets the road, Via produces Albus, always. Always. And how that Albus will play out won't necessarily be Alec Guinness turning up for you. It might be some other expression of that. It might be some other instantiation of that thing in the sublunary world, but it's still playing out like that. And so rather than needing, so in some ways it makes it easier for us, rather than needing to know all the complicated ways that the 9 of Cups does and doesn't get on with the 4 of Swords. And again, that's not to bag on tarot. That's to show that tarot is way more nuanced and complicated in some ways. Instead, we just have to add the figures together and we get the third figure, like and the exact interrelationality of them can be a mystery that is a continually renewable resource, not a mystery like the small fee of $999.99 you can be initiated and know the secrets of the thing. It's not blocking something off or being precious about I've got a secret. It's like the mystery as an infinitely renewable resource that we continue to return to and meditate on and construct our wisdoms from.
Fantastic. This has been so much. It's one of those things where this kind of stuff gets me incredibly excited. I'm kicking myself as to why I didn't see the appeal of this earlier in my magical quote unquote career. It's so odd now that I'm looking at it now and I'm just like, this ticks every one of the boxes for me. I don't get it. Like I don't understand what was my problem. I see dots and I see you might have to add things, so therefore bad.
Right.
Truthfully,
right.
Geomancy is a glorious system. It's wonderful. It tells so many different stories. There's so many different ways of looking at things, and I absolutely adore it. And I'm not just saying that because I'm jumping on the Dr. Al bandwagon because
no. I happily evangelize for it every time I get a client. It's like, have you had a Geomancy reading from anyone before? And they're like, no. I'm like, wonderful. All right, this is great. Hopefully, we'll get a useful answer for you, and it'll be good news for you. But more to the point, let me tell you the ground news. Yeah. So no, I agree. And I the more I study it, the more I fall in love with it, and the more I find it helpful and useful, and the more it hopefully inspires me to get better and do better by it and through it for my clients and friends and family.
100%. So I was going to ask the question, like, what's the first step for people who want to learn geomancy? Well, I'll tell you what your first step is, everybody. Dr. Al has a course called Rediscovering Geomancy, an Oracle of the Elements and Planets. Can you tell us about this course that you offer?
Sure. Yeah. Well, the Rediscovering Geomancy is a 2-hour class. I call them class bundles because I don't like the idea of just selling a recording. I like it to come with the scans of the primary sources I'm talking about, so people can go through these handbooks for themselves, as well as recommended further reading and things like that. So Rediscovering is a 2-hour class that you can get off my website, off the class bundles section, and that goes through a broad introduction to each of the figures, to how we set a chart. Again, with it's easier with visual aids.
Yes.
It becomes very, very simple to explain. Very difficult to see it just written out in a book or talked about potentially. And that's a 2-hour introduction to the thing. At the end of that, I feel you have a good idea about where you might start. If you want to go a little deeper, I have my Geomancy Foundation course is a 5-part course. It's about 10 hours of like detailed study on the fundamentals and foundation, of the practice. And that goes through the figures in way more depth. It goes through some quote advanced techniques. The term is, I don't like the term. I love the techniques, like the via puncti we talked about, like the part of fortune, like the index, things like the super judge, the reconciler, all those kinds of fun little concepts. We also go on I started trying to get at this sense of it's not just about maths and memorizing all these different configurations. So I take my students on a imaginary pub crawl as well. I kind of like narrate them going to each of the figures as if it were a pub or a bar. So Pua, I often think about or frame as a sports bar full of like dudes in like hockey jerseys. We're all on the same team, bro. Right. They're all drinking like, weird Alco Pops, like sugary, like kids drinks, but with loads of booze in them. There's a fight outside. Everyone has a knife. But, if you can also like rally everyone together against a common enemy, then everyone's on your side.
That's right.
Acquisitio is an old London banker's pub to me. Albus is a library cafe. Cowder is a nightclub that burned down last night, and you turn up and not only are you not allowed in, it doesn't exist anymore. It's just a smoking crater. And people like these. That when I ask people like what did you like about it that I can do more of, like to be better at doing this for people, they get more bang for their geomantic buck. Everyone, it seems, very much likes those. So I've been thinking about the figures as places, as a helpful way of being like, what kind of answer would live in a place like this? Right. What kind of behavior does it prompt? What instantiations, things like that. So the foundation will be up at some point on a site. At the moment, I have a bunch of recordings that I'm just selling privately. So if you want to reach out to me, I like talking to people online and hearing what they're after, because not everyone needs to study it in that depth, but I think everyone can. That's the idea. So yeah, you can dip a toe in and take a 2-hour class off my website, or you can reach out to me and do like 10 hours of training, which absolutely sets you up for like how to phrase questions, how to read for yourself, if not start to read for others as well.
Doug here. Just wanted to let everybody know that in the meantime, since recording this episode with Dr. Al, he has actually released his Geomancy foundational course. So if you want to go on that geomantic pub crawl, now you can. I will have links for it in the show notes, or head to Dr. Al's personal website. All right, back to the previously recorded episode. And you also offer, you're probably incredibly busy these days, but you also do geomantic readings for people as well.
Yeah. I offer divinatory consults, which, as I say, about an hour long. Went through some of the process of that. Where we set a chart. And again, my spirits are way smarter than I am. That's why I work with them. And so I also offer magical coaching, where we can talk about like options and say like, I have not heard of that, or I have heard of that. Here's a bunch of resources about that thing that you're concentrating on. That sounds interesting. That sounds dangerous, blah, blah, blah. Like I can offer vague perspectives, but for actual definitive, what should I do at this time? I reserve that for divination. Like a coaching session can tell you like, hey, here's how I dealt with a similar problem if I had that, or here's what I heard some people did, or here's options you have. But it's divination that can get the oracle spirits measuring what's going on with your spirits and telling my spirits, in order that we can get the clearest bespoke solutions, strategies, and remediations, if necessary, to secure blessings, to avoid maladies and hindrances, and to to attempt to work out what's best for you specifically. Like magic is deeply personal, is deeply intimate occasionally, and so helping someone with their own practice and to work out what their priorities are is one of my favorite things to do. It's really, really, really great. Genuinely a privilege to get to help people explore their practices and themselves. You know.
Fantastic. Now, last time we had you on the show, we talked a bit about the excellent book on the art of magic. You guys were doing Speakeasy of the Dead as well. You produced a book in the meantime called The Art of Cyprian's Mirror of Four Kings. That was released. What else do you got going on in your world, Dr. Al? You're such a busy person. There's got to be something else that you might be having cooking in the cauldron.
Yeah, I'm teaching most weeks these days. Around Monday, I have a bunch of things on necromancy, a bunch of classes on cunning craft, like psalm magic and cunning craft coming up, as well as, what else? Working with the fourth book of occult philosophy that we talked about a little bit about. So I have a bunch of classes that you can find on my link tree, and I'll provide that link if you don't mind passing it on to folks.
Always.
I'm also speaking and convening 2 panels for the Salem Witchcraft and Folklore Festival, which is coming up in August as well, which is a stellar lineup. Again, I'm doing a solo class on crossodomancy, on turning the sieve and shears. Again, getting real cunning crafty about things. So we're going to talk about these object divinations and the arguing of St. Peter and St. Paul and fun things to do with scissors. So doing a whole class on that. I'm also chairing 2 panels, one of which is both of which were titled because I came up with daft titles that no one stopped me. So the first is a panel on folk necromancy, which with my the 2 co-moderators on the folk necromancy group that I run with Jesse Hathaway Diaz, who I do Radio Free Golgotha with, and with our dear friend Dr. Ben Joffe. And so that's Dead Excited, a panel of folk necromancy where we're talking about those kinds of concepts. And then I am returning with a second Folk Around and Find Out panel, which is the same stellar cast of professional folk magicians. We have my dear friend, Professor Charles Porterfield, and my dear friend, Doc Beverly Smith. We have my dear friend, Jesse Hathaway Diaz again. We have my dear friend, Brandon Weston, and we have my dear friend, Aaron Hodges. And we're going to be talking, this one is Folk Around and Find Out 2, Back in the Habitat. And so it's going to be about land magic specifically, and not just, which route do I use to, hurt my boss or what have you. It's all about the class antagonist.
That's right.
Tonight. Yeah. I love humans, but I couldn't have one as a boss,
No.
So we'll be talking about where these particular crafts and like all of these people are like deeply situated in their traditions and in their professional and personal practices. And so how they interact with land, where the land informs their work, where they remind the land what it is, so it reminds us who we are, that kind of stuff, as well as some particularly, cool things about like this one weird leaf TM. And there'll be some like lightning rounds of like 4 things to do with nettles, go. And things like that. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And the Salem Witchcraft and Folklore Festival has an absolutely stellar lineup anyway. All sorts of absolutely amazing things going on there. The tickets are available now. You can buy individual tickets for individual classes, or you can buy day passes, or you can buy a whole thing for the whole ruddy weekend.
Amazing.
And I'll provide a link that you can show folks. But yeah, really looking forward to that.
I have to say this because I've been doing this magic thing for about 20 years or so. I would consider myself a little bit old hat. Dr. Al's courses are ridiculously great. Pretty much one of my, I'm just going to say this. I hate magic courses. I don't think that, I think that they're garbage for the most part. So I have an ambivalence towards people trying to teach, quote unquote, teach magic online, or even, so Dr. Al's courses are it's unreal. They're so fantastic. Everybody, particularly the ones that I love going to, are the ones about necromancy and cunning folk that Dr. Al does. They're amazing. Head to the Salem Folk and Witchcraft Festivals. That's called.
Yeah, Witchcraft and Folklore Festival. Yeah. SalemWitchFest.com. Yeah.
Nice. Do you have any books that are coming out anytime soon that you want to try and plug? What's happening with that?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. I have another thing. I don't want to. I'll be a tease. I'll be a dreadful tease. I have a book on. I mentioned exploring the use of the angelical language that gets called Enochian, outside of the systems of magic that get called Enochian. And I have a slim text, which just so happens to be about both geomancy and the use of angelical versicles and a series of calls, prayers, and charms for working in the angelical language for better cohering and stirring and deploying the virtues and spirits of the figures. So I'm delighted to talk about that more when it comes out, but I'm not. I can't say a lot more except I've got a secret. I hate doing that, but I want to be able to be like, and it's here, as opposed to being like, I have to finish writing the thing, and there's other bits and pieces like the blurb and keep various other bits and pieces. But yes, no, I'm very excited to publish that, and I'm working on a bunch of other stuff. My general policy at this point is to try and use my procrastination to my benefit, to work on the thing I don't want to work on least. And so as soon as you get bored of working on one grimoire, you skip to another, which is definitely an effective and professional use of my time.
Right.
I'm a professional. I'm a grown-up. So I'm working on a couple of things around Faustian grimoires, as well as more 16th century, early modern English Cypriana and Goetic material as well. And more will come on that as I'm banging that out.
For sure. So I will have links to every single one of the things that Dr. Cummins is getting up to. He's got a wonderful link tree that's just, it all has his classes there as they come up. All of those links can be found at whatmagicisthis.com, as well as some show notes. The show notes not going to be too vast here. The realm of geomancy, a lot of the links are going to be right back to Dr. Al's website, because he's the guy, he's the geomancer. He knows all about this stuff. So not a ton of show notes, but please, if this is interesting to you, check them out. Get on top of it, and you'll be casting shield charts like nobody's business right quick, real soon. All right, so those are available at whatmagicisthis.com. Also there, you can find a link to my Twitter account, my Instagram account, and my Facebook account. I'm not overly active on Facebook or Instagram. I'm getting a little bit better at Instagram, but most of the time I just share some crazy stuff, crazy cool stuff on Twitter. Be sure to add me there. If you love the show, please tell a friend, and then perhaps they'll tell a friend, and then they'll tell a friend, and that's how this whole word of mouth thing gets going. It's my favorite way of spreading the love that is What Magic Is This. And so if you enjoy it, please tell somebody else that you enjoy it, and hopefully they'll enjoy it and do the same. Also, if you want to leave a review for me, either on iTunes or Spotify or Stitcher or any place that one can, you can write it on a wall, but obviously don't vandalize somebody else's property. But I would prefer if you could leave a review for me on iTunes. People do read those reviews; they really enjoy them. And maybe you've been listening to What Magic Is This for ages, and you just you happen to have an iTunes account. I would appreciate it. Just write a couple of words, a couple of sentences. Don't have to do a full essay, and just say, hey, you know what? I love this podcast. And then maybe somebody will read that, and then they'll love the podcast as well. Do you think that I'm doing something a little interesting or kind of fun here on What Magic Is This, and you want to show your support, not just, spread the love by telling your friends? We actually want to throw some shekels my way. There's 3 ways of doing that, and they're all great. All right, let's go through them. The very first way is joining my Patreon. That is patreon.com/whatmagicisthis, or head to What Magic Is This and click on any one of the Become My Patron buttons, links there. They're all over the place. I plaster them everywhere. Click that. It's only $7 a month. That is all I'm asking for, and that gives you exclusive access to tons of episodes that I've done about the kind of magic that I really enjoy. I also have videos, and these videos aren't just me talking into a camera. I take you through. I show you. I'm not just telling you, but with video. I'm actually showing you how to do the things, how to make your own incense, how to set up an ancestral altar, all of these great things. And yes, $7 a month, that's all. It gives you access to a Discord server that is full of wonderful, great people. I've had people say, I love your Discord. I love the Patreon stuff that you have there, but the people on the Discord are just the nicest, greatest people. And I said this last episode, it is literally the only happy and kind place left on the internet. It's true. It's true. But that is only available through the Patreon. This is the worst Patreon pitch I've ever done. I'm kind of bouncing and ping-ponging all over the place. But truthfully, my favorite stuff that I produce is on the Patreon. In some respects, the reason I set up my show, What Magic Is This, is to be able to set up and make the kind of content that I make on my Patreon. That sounds like a bit of an exaggeration. It's true. I absolutely love the stuff I do on Patreon. I get to talk about my favorite grimoires, things like the Hygromantia. I talk about like spirits like Astaroth and gods like Hermanubis. My favorite things that I do is all on the Patreon. And truthfully, yeah, $7 a month these days, that's not very much. True, I know gas is really expensive, but other than that, you're basically paying for a whole other podcast and a YouTube channel. Basically, I put videos up there. It's wonderful. So that's my pitch. I'm just going to say my favorite stuff is on the Patreon. It's like a totally different show. $7, that's all I'm asking. Be there or be square. And I really hope that you're not going to be square. So patreon.com/whatmagicisthis, or click on any one of the Patreon links at whatmagicisthis.com. Another way of supporting the show is through PayPal. So if you head to What Magic Is This, find any one of the PayPal buttons there, click that, and you can donate $5, $10, $20, any and every amount is appreciated. I mean, if you're going to send me like a cent, I'm going to see that as a fuck you, Doug. But I'll still take it. I'll take that penny because I'm very cheap and frugal. I tell people I'm frugal, but actually I'm just cheap. Anyways, PayPal, that's a great way of supporting the show. That goes right back into making sure that I pay for hosting, for the website, for the podcast, for all of that kind of stuff. I don't use that money for anything else, just making sure that the podcast continues to run at a pretty high quality. You can make a podcast pretty easily these days for like cheap. I don't like doing that. I like to actually have the best quality. And so I pay for all the best plugins and the best equipment. And yeah, that's all from the PayPal donation. So I really appreciate those as well. Another way of showing the support is by buying some merchandise. You can buy t-shirts, tote bags, mugs, stickers, fridge magnets, notebooks. The notebooks look so great. Somebody just the other day sent me a picture of their notebook, their new notebook. It looks so great. It's of my Ouroboros, which is a snake that's eating its own tail. That logo, it looks so good. Oh man, I love my merchandise. I literally just dropped some serious coin. I'm my best customer, and I hope that doesn't sound like something really lame to say, but it's true. I love buying my own crap because it looks great, and I did all the designs. Anyways, if you like that kind of stuff and you want to show your support and, not a ton of money, but some of it trickles down to me, head to whatmagicisthis.com, click on the menu, go to merchandise, grab anything. There's so much great stuff there. There's phone cases, even notebooks, tote bags, t-shirts. There's no underwear yet, but I'm doing some research. I'll just say that. Anyways, all of these things are available at whatmagicisthis.com. All of the ways of supporting me and following me on Twitter or Instagram, it's all there, as well as the show notes. But truthfully, the main reason I do this pitch at the end of the show is because I want to see you on Patreon. I love Patreon. It's where I want to see you. It's the best. Yes, all of those things, how to do those, are available at whatmagicisthis.com. Also, Patreon's only $7. That's all I'm going to say. $7. $7 is nothing. That's absolutely nothing. Anyways. All right. Whatmagicisthis.com for all your What Magic Is This wants and or needs. Dr. Al, thank you so much for all of your knowledge today. We've been recording here for going on 2 hours. My goodness, it's been such an enormous amount of fun. I would hope that hopefully one of these days, sometime in the future, we'll have you back on the show again to talk about another thing. But I just love the way that your mind works. I love everything you have to say. I love your enthusiasm. It's just it's been an absolute blast.
Oh, bless you, Douglas. Yeah, the time flies by when we chat. Thank you. And obviously, I'm delighted that you're now firmly part of Team Geomancy.
I'm Team Geomancy. Yeah,
we'll be holding you down for your ceremonial tattoo and
right, perfect.
Like that. Yeah, we're severing all ties. Now you're part of the cult. No, I'm delighted to enthuse about that, and it's always great to talk to you. And I love the way you think about how other people are going to approach a thing as well. It's not just about like, oh, this scratches my itch. I love the way you make information more available, not just in these conversations, but like breaking it down for people in ways that are helpful for them. So thank you.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. Everybody, that's it. That's Geomancy. I want everybody to go and grab, some Druid sticks, grab some coins, grab some beans. Just grab anything and give yourself, download a chart, take it right from my website and give her, because that's honestly the best way of of getting to grips with it is yeah, there's a couple of things you might want to look up. I'll have the show notes for that, but just go out and do it, because that's the best way of doing it. So that's the show. That's Geomancy, everybody. We got one more for this month of divination on What Magic Is This. Until then, I want each and every one of you to stay healthy, stay hopeful, and stay luminous. We will talk at you soon. Goodbye, everybody. Ta-ta. Bye-bye.